Hello and welcome back to Speed Demon Painting. Today we are taking a further look at the Admiral's Tournament Guide for organised play events coming in the 2023 season. This document definitely is not just meant to be used by tournament players and event organisers. It can also be used by people having a pickup game and just wanting a nice little mission to go along with these as well, as explained in the first video. The first video also took a closer look at the special rules that are to be used in this mission pack, such as Fog of War, and this video will not be focusing on those rule sets that much. It'll be more focused about the new type of mission to be played in this one, and these are the Desperate encounters. The first one was more about the common encounters, and now we're taking a look at the Desperate ones. So if you want to learn more about the common encounters, definitely check out that video, and if you in the future want to learn about the new perilous encounters, I've got another video coming up for that one soon, so click the thumbs up button and subscribe to the channel for those future updates as well. And with all of those introductions out of the way, let's take a look at the first Desperate encounter, which is called Ambush. This ambush mission does not use the standard deployment zones like we saw in the first one, the common encounters. In this case, you have to look at the different zones on the map. You take the side zones, even if you're playing on a long board, to set up for the ambushing player, which is the red zone. And the defending player, player B in this case, has to deploy in that small green zone in the center. Well, not the complete center, the center line, I should say, of along the long side of the board, and get all of his forces crammed up in there. This means you have to put all of your forces as the defending player in a 24 inch by 24 inch square, so yeah, definitely be on the lookout for any blast markers in your opponent's force, because those can really wreak havoc on you on the first turn if you're not careful. Having said that though, shooting your opponent apart is definitely not the main objective of this mission. The objective is to launch assaults in this mission, and the more you do, the more victory points you will score. Because the objective is, when a unit launches an assault and you determine the assault resolution, this can be found in that table on page 24 of the main rulebook, the assaulting player scores victory points based on the result. Should the assault go horribly wrong and the assaulting player suffers a counter-assault, it is actually the defender that is going to be scoring 3 victory points. If the result is a driven back result, there are no victory points awarded at all. If it's a havoc, you gain 1 victory point, a brutal result 2 victory points, catastrophic 3, and if you manage to get a carnage, which is a result of 8+ in favor of the attacker, you score 4 victory points as well. I really like this mission because it very much captures the sort of desperate fight that crew members are going to be in when they are being ambushed from all sides, and that means that some of the factions that are naturally good at doing assaults are also going to be having a very good time with this mission as well. And that means that if you're designing a force for an event and you notice that this one is in here, make sure that you pick units that are, you know, pretty much good at doing assaults, because yeah, you're not going to carry through with this one via carriers, unless of course you use those carriers to support your assaults, which isn't exactly an option that is taken all too often in the current rule set, but it is definitely something you should keep in mind when you're playing this mission. Next up we have the Dance with the Devil mission, and it's the second Desperate encounter, and the deployment is sort of across a diagonal line for both players with the red zones, and we have played this mission, and it's actually quite fun because you can get some very long distances in this mission by fighting corner to corner on the rectangular map of 48 by 27 inch in this mission. This mission also uses the Fog of War rules, although it is called night fighting given the context of this Dance with the Devil story. The thing with this mission is try to get as many of your own units out there and play defensively as they describe in the designer notes in this one. You score victory points in this mission by having one of your units with at least one battle-ready model survive at the end step of the game. That can be when the dice down result is being called, mind you, but usually at the end of turn 5 in most games. And as the designer's notes state, this is a special one where you're supposed to be as quiet as possible with your force until you are confident enough that firing your guns is going to result into something to destroy the enemy models, otherwise it might not be worth exposing your units to return fire. Now this is just a quick recap of the Fog of War mission. In the Fog of War mission you have to cancel all of your hits and heavy hits during an attack, unless the unit has already fired prior to the turn where you're shooting at it. So you're sort of giving away your position if you're taking a shot with anything that is not a bomb or a torpedo attack. So it's all about, you know, do you want to shoot, do you want to get a bit closer, etc, etc. As a side note, if you get within 5 inch of an enemy unit, your whole force can blast away at that unit that has an enemy within 5 inch of it. So it's all about a few quiet first turns and then all hell breaks loose. We have played this one and I thought it was a very enjoyable experience, and if I were to design a mission pack for a tournament, this one would be high on my list to include, because really it is a very tactical dagger sort of in the back gameplay, which I really enjoyed. The third desperate encounter is Escalation, and it's a bit confusing. When I first saw this I thought like, oh, this is very similar to the ambush setup it seems, but it isn't. You have 2 deployment zones marked in red, and you can deploy very far into the enemy zones should you so desire, and the green center here in the middle is just used for victory points. So you're still setting up player A in one of the red zones and player B in one of the other red zones. The catch, however, is that only a third of your units gets to be deployed. Now it doesn't mention if this needs to be rounded up or down, but I do believe that the main rules say that you should always round numbers up if there is any discussion about it. So I suppose that if you have a weird number, you have to round up for this deployment rule set as well. The remainder of the force needs to go into reserve, and yeah, it sort of speaks for itself that any units or any battle fleets that you include with the strategic reserve rules are going to be absolutely invaluable for this mission. So should you go to an event that's being organized and you see this escalation mission being used, try to include a battle fleet that has the tactical reserves rule in it as well. You'll definitely get a lot of bang for your buck out of that one in this one. The way you actually score victory points in this mission is by getting your own units into that little green zone, like I stated earlier. And it's very interesting the way that they're doing the victory points, because a player scores victory points equal to the total mass of their models completely within the central green objective. So it does help if you're able to mark it out rather clearly with some see-through sort of, yeah, plexiglass thing, for instance, so you can easily see if your model is in there. Fast mass 1 units are definitely going to be able to get you some cheeky first points in the opening, but yeah, it's worth getting your flagships in there as well, completely within there, to score some victory points as well. However, if you have to be completely in it, don't get too excited with things like your Ice Maiden units, because those are massive, and you've got a 16-inch zone that you can get into, and if I'm not mistaken, that Ice Maiden is 10 or so on its own, so good luck squeezing that one in there. Having said that, Vitruvian Colossi and Ica Colossi are going to be an absolute godsend to any player who has them in their list, because they are mass 3 and it shouldn't be too hard to squeeze them into that zone at all. The fourth desperate encounter is a rescue mission, and I like this one the most by design. I think the idea behind it is really cool, because you're meant to be fighting over 3 central objective wreck markers in this case, where there are crashed ships and everything. A good modeling opportunity. In case you had to buy a set and have a few ships left over that you're not really using, you can make some interesting wreck markers out of those. And the idea is to go and rescue the crew members left behind on those 3 wrecks. The one thing I'm a bit unsure of is the way that the wreck markers get scored in this mission, however. And it's something that I suppose can get a bit gamey. If you're up against a player who's really good at getting game mechanics, he can probably score an early amount of victory points and completely block the opponent from scoring anything as well. How do you score victory points? Well, if you've got a unit with at least one of its models within 4 inch of a wreck marker, it may forego its shooting step, so you're doing it in the shooting phase, meaning you get to do your movement phase first with that unit. If it forgoes its shooting step, it can bring the wreck aboard. If it does so, the controlling player scores 5 victory points. So if you manage to move in there and then not shoot, you can score a fairly easy 5 victory points. There's no need to roll a dice or anything. Once the player has scored, however, you roll an action dice, and on the result of a blank you remove the wreck marker. On any other result, the wreck marker just stays there, and you can potentially get another 5 victory points, or your opponent can even score 5 victory points from the same wreck marker. The part where I think it gets a bit iffy is the second paragraph here. If a model is the initial target of an attack while within 4 inch of a wreck marker, you also roll an action die. On the result of a blank, the wreck marker is destroyed by the attack and is removed from play. It does not mention how effective the attack has to be. And that last part, that is the thing where I think it might be a bit gamey, because if you've got a unit within 4 inch, because you're trying to score, you're behind on victory points, you have to do something, so you're trying to score some of your own with a unit, and once you do, there's nothing stopping an opponent from just declaring a bunch of single shots on one of those models, trying to fish for the blanks to sort of remove the wreck marker in this mission. And so perhaps I would like to see this amended to whenever a model within 4 inches of it takes at least a point of hull damage, or maybe even a critical damage marker, a magazine explosion, or a catastrophic hit, something along those lines that would automatically destroy the thing without having to roll a dice for it, because rules as written now, you can sort of fish for them by doing a bunch of different attacks that will quite likely lead to nothing except for you trying to destroy that marker by shooting at it. Like I said, I really like this mission by design. I think it's a really cool concept, but that's a small thing I would change. Next up, we have the desperate encounter called the Research Station, where you put a Mass 3 inactive platform into the center and player A or B deploy in one of the red zones indicated on the map here. Now, before I get too much into the actual mission itself, I'm going to go down a bit in this document, because there are a few extra terrain rules included into them, and just what are inactive platforms is described a bit later in the document. Platforms actually come within the special box that has these rules, and now have their own rules to them as well. They are a special type of obstacle. Like all obstacles, the area within 1 inch of all of these platforms is considered hazardous terrain. Hazardous terrain is also explained into this one, and it means that if you come in during your activation in hazardous terrain, you suffer a disorder token on top of anything else that might have gone on during your activation. But it doesn't matter if you get into that hazardous terrain more than once during your activation, you're only taking the one disorder token in this case. These special platforms are terrain in encounters, and they are designated either as active or inactive. These should not be confused with any platforms like units that are included in a player's force. So they are very much a part of the terrain and not belong to anyone. Such units are detailed fully in the faction order of battle, as you would expect. Now, inactive platforms don't really do anything and don't try to defend themselves against any surrounding ships that you have around them. Active platforms, however, do, and once we get to the missions with active platforms, I'll be describing how that works in more detail. So yeah, this research station is an inactive platform standing in the middle, and you have to try and occupy it during the game, because the objective is to occupy it during the check for victory step and gain 5 VP when you do. Now, how do you occupy it? You have to launch an assault against that research station with the purpose of occupying it. following the rules for launching an assault with the following changes. At the start of the encounter, the research station is just unoccupied and is just considered to have a citadel of 10. So the first person to try and assault it is having to deal with a citadel of 10 and no defense value, so it's a fairly straightforward one to overcome. You then perform your assault against those 10 defensive die, and if the result is a counterattack or is driven back, the assaulting unit suffers from the appropriate consequences and there is no control gain over the research station. If you scored a havoc or a brutal result, the assaulting player occupies the research station. However, he hasn't really got full control of it, meaning that it is only controlled with a citadel of 8. I suppose it's best to sort of leave a dice there or a marker showing you that you only have a sort of a tenuous control over it, and it's rather easy for your opponent to overtake. If you, however, manage to assault it with a catastrophic or carnage result, the assaulting player starts occupying the research station and is from that point on treated as having a citadel of 12. It means that the crew has really got it under control, has been able to sort of batten down the hatches, defend it with marines taking up defensive position and all of that jazz. The really cool thing comes in the last bit though. Once a player actually occupies that research station, it is considered to have activated until the following turn. So in the next turn, it becomes one of your units, because when an occupied player, it can activate it using the 3 heavy gun batteries represented on those Mass 3 platforms that you have, with 360 degrees field of fire. Those stats from heavy gun batteries can of course be found in any Orbat really, although I think the Enlightened may have to be a bit cheeky and look up what those stats are if you're an Enlightened player, but don't worry, unless you're playing Enlightened versus Enlightened, you won't have many issues with that one. No other actions may be performed by the research station, so it's not like you can start moving it or doing any special activations, special actions with it. You can just shoot and that's about it. But it's really cool that you're actually getting 3 heavy gun batteries on top of you scoring victory points if you manage to actually hold on to it. So I really like this mission as well. And then the final desperate encounter is called Saberrattle, and I suppose this one is as close as you're going to get to a pitched battle, where the intention is just to destroy enemy units and just do that. The objective is, at the end of the encounter, each player scores 2 victory points for each enemy unit completely destroyed, and 1 victory point for each enemy unit that is completely crippled, meaning if you're playing against somebody who's got a lot of minimum sized units, in order to not give away too many squad killer bonuses, you're going to be scoring a lot of victory points. If you go to an event and you find this list is on there, it is a sort of mission where Death Star play units are very much a key to victory. So a good tournament organizer, if they want to include this saberrattle, because it is a good mission, I mean it's fairly straightforward, which is always a good thing if you're organizing an event, do be wary that you're not picking too many other missions that reward Death Star playstyle or Death Star unit selection, if you will. If you want to have your participants really think about their lists and put in a lot of thought, combining one of these, for instance, with the one where you have to get your own units in the enemy deployment zone, which is a mission where you can score a lot of points if you've got smaller units in your force, that would be an interesting conundrum for your participants to solve, for instance. And there we have it. Those are the desperate encounters found in the Admiral's book. If you liked the video, make sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel for future updates. And I hope to see you soon for a deep dive into the perilous encounters, which are the most complicated encounters found in this mission pack, but they can be really fun and even quite narrative as well, as we'll soon discover in the next video. I hope to see you then. Bye!